Hi, David Cristello here from Jetpack Workflow and Growing Your Firm podcast. I wanted to walk through a 1041 tax return workflow diagram. Now, of course, if you are watching this anywhere but the blog, you can always go to jetpackworkflow.com/blog for free articles, free trainings, more free videos, and so much more. So let's dive into the 1041 tax return workflow diagram. Now, we like to separate these into three different buckets. We like to put receive and confirm, process and fulfill, and then file and follow up. Now, before we dive into these buckets, what is the point of creating a workflow diagram? Why do we do this in the first place? Well, we want to have complete transparency, and we want to have a 360 view of how things are moving through our firm or practice. And by setting up and designing or even just brainstorming a workflow diagram, you're able to see where all of the moving pieces are, and more importantly, able to identify bottlenecks in your system. You're able to see where things are not clear, where expectations are not met. Perhaps client expectations or client understanding is falling through the cracks. And so it's really great to set up a bird's eye view of your workflow because you can optimize around these things. You can see the bottlenecks and you can improve upon them. You can see where clients are getting frustrated and improve your process. You can see where there's your team members are taking a lot of time in a certain step, and you can look through that checklist or that process sheet. So with that in mind, let's dive into the first bucket around receiving and confirming the information that you received. Now, we all know that to begin client work, we need to actually get the client information. So, part one is all about that interaction and that engagement. Those email templates, those checklists you hand off to clients, those portals that you hand off to clients, those email reminders that you hand off to clients. There's many systems that could be put in place here, but the point is, do you have a system and how is it working? We can define it here in the workflow. Now you can see this is a very basic client request, receive, confirm, info missing, client request, scan. Now what you can do is take a very simple workflow diagram like this and you can see where the bottleneck is occurring. Maybe we could send more client requests because we're not receiving them on time. Maybe we receive them, but it takes a really long time to confirm, and then by the time we get back to the client, they've already moved on to the next item. This is out of sight, out of mind, so we have to reel them back in to give us more information. Perhaps the scanning stage is not fluid, and you can look at every step, and of course you can add more, you can remove some, but the point is, through each step of your workflow, what can be optimized, what can be improved. Perhaps when you receive that client request, you typically have a kickoff meeting, right? And what are some things you can do during that kickoff meeting to better set expectations, to better communicate the value that they'll be receiving, to better communicate the timeline in which this will be completed if you receive documentation by a certain date. So much with workflow in this first step is just the cadence that you bring to working with your client and the clear expectations you set for them. We've had interviews on Growing Your Firm podcast. We've talked with people like Ed Kless and Ron Baker and many more where they'll talk about various pricing structures based on when you receive client information. So there's a real incentive for that client to submit them on time. So that's certainly one option. And again, the goal right now is to just set up your workflow so you can see all the moving pieces. The next step would be process and fulfill. We have the information, we're ready to begin working. Maybe it's passed along to another team member in this regard. And so we go into the review stage, and we see that perhaps one of the biggest bottlenecks is info's missing. We have to message client, then it goes back in the process. Maybe a client worked with one individual in this stage, now they work with a second individual. They don't know the second individual, they never talked to this individual. Maybe they're a little bit frustrated with the process, maybe they're confused about what they actually need to submit. And again, by laying out a workflow, you're able to identify this and then start brainstorming ways to implement or improve a more robust workflow. And we mentioned this in the blog post with this video, but it's really important to include your team in these discussions. Now, if you're a sole proprietor, of course that's fine. Maybe your team is you and a spouse or you and a colleague. That's fine. But if you do have team members on board, bring them into the office, bring them into the conference room where you're working on this, and brainstorm ideas. If they're on the front lines, if they're working with clients every single day, ask them what can be improved and maybe have ideas for improvement. Especially with younger generations, they want to be involved in this process. They want to contribute. They want to add ideas. And this is a great time to include them in that process. The final thing is file and follow up. So, here we're going to review the information. We're going to go through the final meeting. And if you did not receive payment early on, which we highly recommend, this is the time where you require payment. You bring in the office, you send them reminders to bring a check. If they, for whatever reason, don't bring a check, you can always, have a credit card processor on file. Obviously, it's not ideal to lose 1 or 2% on that transaction for the fees, but we always believe that the improvement in cash flow is worth a percentage. Your ability to then use that money, redeploy it to your team members or into marketing dollars, into sales dollars, makes up for waiting 30, 60, 90 days to actually get that payment on file. And finally, if you're going to be adding additional services, scheduling another meeting, talking about additional strategies. Maybe, you work with an individual, they've never had a budget. Maybe you're working with a company and they're looking for a new bookkeeper, and maybe your firm does bookkeeping, or maybe you can refer out a bookkeeper that you highly recommend. These discussions are very, very important, not only for building a client relationship, which is key, which would include word of mouth and referrals, but then also the profitability of your firm, talking about other services, promoting referral partners, whatever it may be. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to leave a comment below. Feel free to share it with a friend or colleague or coworker. And if you want more information like this, you can always go to jetpackworkflow.com/blog. This is where we have free articles. This is where we post the latest interviews on growing your firm podcast and so much more. Thanks so much for watching.